Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. My name again is Jeffrey Davis, and we are streaming everyday stories of leadership, entrepreneurship, and how people are dealing with the new economy, keeping people at work, but keeping people safe, as we're going to learn in our next segment. And our next guest is Alex Bedig, Vice President of Information and Technology at Opti RTC. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You know, Alex, you're involved in a segment of the economy that I've always been very interested in, and that is flooding, flood management, flood monitoring. It's a topic that I think everybody should be more aware of. We tend to deal with things after they happen, and you're in the business of dealing with something before it happens, correct?
Well, that's the way we like to think of it. And I think it's something, flooding, that everybody is starting to become more and more aware of because we see it on our news cycles more and more these days. And when we look at it kind of over the longer picture of history, what we see is just continued development and how that causes the need for our communities to now adapt to the circumstances that they're in differently, and how our technologies really can be part of that is what we're focused on these days.
So tell us what Opti does exactly.
Sure. So what Opti does really is we create a place for water to be stored at the last minute, just in time when you need it. So we don't create water, we create a place to put water. And we do that by integrating control structures, so valves and pumps, with weather forecasts, which let us see what's going to happen in the future. And we integrate that with how the various stormwater assets, which are just places that have been engineered to collect rain when it hits the ground in pools and places, we integrate with how those assets have been designed to get them to work effectively better. So whether you're trying to prevent flooding and you want to, you've got a lake in the middle of your city and you want to drain that down predictively so that there's now more capacity for the water that is going to hit the ground to collect in that lake instead of in the roads or in the homes or basements. That's one way that we kind of directly make cities and communities more able to handle rainfall events and the runoff that they cause differently. We do that in a variety of different ways. We also can impact water quality. So another thing that a lot of communities are interested in is making sure that the rivers are swimmable or fishable, or that they're not stinky so that property values don't get impacted. And one way they do that is they hold water in stormwater basins instead of actually releasing it down to the river or wherever the stormwater is collected in their city. And what that looks like typically is trying to do what they call restoring natural hydrology conditions, getting the environment, even though we've built this whole paved infrastructure, to put the water into the ground like it did before it happened. And it works okay, but we're able to make it work a lot better by actually, when we know that it's not going to rain in the future, just holding the water back by closing a valve and letting the water seep into the ground more than it otherwise would if it was just flowing out of an open hole. So what we're really representing at Opti is the change from static design and static solutions to these problems, which in my mind are associated with why we have so many flooding issues and other water quality management issues, the static design process we've had to go through in the past, and bringing a solution that allows for more dynamic solutions that can do more with what we already have. And a couple examples of that I just gave you of how we deal with flooding and water quality.
Is this, again, I grew up on the water, not full time, but I grew up on boats and I grew up on an island.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a newer technology? Is this different than in the past?
Well, the newness of it is really the ability to do the real-time control and to have the weather forecast brought in. But kind of like you're alluding to, we're really just taking the ideas of the past and applying them in a new way, and in a way that is much more scalable than what's been done before. So the idea of collecting water and not letting it go into the roads is kind of as old as time, right? But when you build a city, there are some real good reasons why you can't build a big enough basin to deal with the flooding of the future. The first thing is just simple business. Like, nobody's allowed to overbuild for 100 years into the future. It doesn't matter what you're doing, because nobody can estimate what that population will look like and who's going to pay for that. And the other one is actually technical. When you build storm drains or sewers or anything that carries polluted runoff, you don't want to overbuild them too big, because the interaction between the water and the air that is in that excess pipe space can actually cause backups in the system over time. So there's a maintenance reason why you don't overbuild sewers to begin with. But over 50, 100, 150 years, as you see, especially on the east coast of America, but really across our country, communities kept building bigger and bigger areas outside of those sewers that were then draining their water into those sewer mains. And so that's where we get, now we've got a larger bathtub and a smaller drain plug that we have to drain all that water through. And so our solution is really, well, don't put it all through that hole in the first place at the same time. Why don't we time this? Why don't we recognize that it doesn't rain the same way across every storm, and it doesn't rain the same way at every point in the city, and there's probably excess capacity that we can keep using in the system in the upstream areas to make the pressure in the downstream parts of the system less. It's just like putting a traffic light system on a highway, to keep rush hour traffic from being too backed up.
That's an interesting comparison. I used to be, he passed away, friends with the person who invented the automatic flushing toilets, because he decided as a little boy that this was going to be a waste of water. Were you sitting around your house as a little boy thinking about flooding? How did you get into this whole field?
Sure. Well, I guess my background came through environmental interest. I was mainly interested in understanding how to spend my life working on a problem that I thought was important for us. And water was a way that I got there because I recognized that it was part of almost every industry. There's water involved in manufacturing. There's water involved, as we've been talking about, in how cities work. People obviously drink water. So if you want to be part of helping how society works, water is an interesting way of going at it. This whole flooding and stormwater management side of things I got into because actually of my co-founder who's moved on from our company, but he originally was a practicing engineer inside of a stormwater management company and had a vision for how dynamic control would actually change the way that the cities he was building and helping build would perform, but wasn't able to realize that vision. And I was kind of the right person at the right time to understand how both delivering this solution would yield incredible benefits systematically for society by giving us visibility into how these systems are actually performing, while also solving a practical problem in the first place. So it wasn't some data collection project that had no clear goals for how we were going to understand the environment. It was much more practical. Here's a problem, water quality and flooding, and we can use information to change the way that those systems work, and we can deliver that with commercially available off-the-shelf components today. So why wouldn't we do it? It's almost like if stormwater engineering had been invented in the early 2000s, this is probably what people would have come up with.
Is Opti in wide use right now, or is it not?
So Opti is widely adopted across America. We've got over 160 installations. I think we're in 22 states. And I think our roadmap there looks like helping our customers and the consulting partners that work with them to understand how they can leverage our capabilities to solve the problems that they really have. And one of the ways that we're doing that is we've heard from them, it's amazing that you're able to extend what we're doing with stormwater management already. This, we've got a site, we'll put a pond on it, or put a basin on it, and it will now work better than it otherwise would have with Opti. Maybe we can build it smaller and actually use some of that excess space for other kinds of development issues. But they're now saying, well, we actually want to use information from downstream or from upstream or from elsewhere in the watershed to explicitly control how our watershed is working, rather than thinking about watershed management as a site-by-site basis. Let's look at that outfall that goes into the river that we're regulated on and make sure that we do everything that we can to not discharge during the wrong periods of time. And so we're bringing that kind of network scale capability into our product stack and doing it with a few of our kind of leading customers to understand how it adds value for them along the way. And one of the simple examples of that is we've always had a remote control feature, the ability to give the operating staff, in case there's a really big storm coming and they don't want to leave it to the automation, we've allowed them to manually control what happens. And in a few really large storms or situations that are not exactly fitting the site-by-site control strategy, they've actually done that. And so we've been able to talk to them and ask them, okay, what were you thinking? How are you going about managing this problem? And we're excited to take those strategies we've learned about it and build it into our product so that communities across the country can now benefit from those abilities. So
My,
that's where we're going.
my last question, during these times of great change, investments in keeping the economy going, what do you say to people in different regions of the country who say, this is not something I want to look at now, we need to put this off to another time?
Well, I
I know you're
guess,
not a salesperson, so
yeah, and I'll answer it as an honest engineer. I think, when we started to pivot to working remotely, working from home, the first thing that I thought of was how difficult it will be to evacuate people during some sort of pandemic, and how those two issues are diametrically opposed. And so I felt incredibly catalyzed because I realized that what we're doing at Opti can give emergency response teams information about where water is pooling in ways that can help with evacuation strategies. And if we're able to install controls upstream in upstream areas, we're able to actually reduce the likelihood that roads are going to be flooded, which would prevent some sort of backup and problem with evacuation. So from my perspective, prevention is worth a lot more than any kind of cure. And I think that thinking about how you can use some of our newer approaches, rather than doing some expensive infrastructure overhaul, it's easier to take a digital technology like ours and apply it to your existing assets and get performance benefits much more quickly within a few months,
interesting.
and actually address the problem for your communities and move the conversation forward by then being able to say, here's the data that shows how we made an impact. Let's look at how we can now make a further impact with the next move. So I think it's these technology solutions that are data driven allow you to make more adaptive and I think more agile decisions as a city manager, where you're reacting to how things have happened in the past, looking at data and saying, well, how can we do things better now?
Well,
Moving forward.
clearly very thoughtful answers and a very important and timely topic for all of us in North America. Alex, if someone is looking for you or looking for Opti RTC, how would they find the company?
The best way to do it is to go to our website at www.optirtc.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Alex Bedig. If you'd like to find me and start up a side conversation that way, I'd be happy to reach out. Mention Radio Entrepreneurs so I know who you are.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show, and we're hoping that you come back again this year to talk to us again about flooding and how different communities are dealing with it. So thanks again for being a guest on Radio Entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for the time.